I've been playing an embarrassing amount of Star Wars Battlefront 2 recently. I have been absolutely chronically addicted, so much so that I've been ignoring my real-life responsibilities so that I can jump on heroes versus villains more and slap people with Iden Versio or make people uninstall this game with Darth Maul. I've really just been having a lot of fun, and there's nothing quite like Star Wars Battlefront 2. From its conception, its shaky and controversial launch, to its complete overhaul and reinvention, the just massive amount of polished content in the game, a full campaign, plenty of iconic Star Wars heroes from every saga, and the fact that it was also canceled near the end of its life cycle. Star Wars Battlefront 2 is what you might rightfully call an emotional roller coaster for EA, DICE, and Star Wars Battlefront fans alike. You know, gamers all across the board really went through it with this game, the ups and the downs. And that's just how it was. This is a really special case of a video game lifespan having insane highs and really low lows. And today we'll be doing a deep dive into talking about Battlefront 2 and why I truly believe that there will never be another game quite like this one again, and respectfully at this point, not even a Star Wars Battlefront 3 would do the trick, but more on that a little bit later. There's a reason I say that. But I would say it's funny, incredibly ironic, and also sad how history tends to repeat itself and mirror the past. The original Star Wars Battlefront games came out and were instantly massive hits. Battlefront 2 was basically a refinement of that formula and mastering the ideas that Battlefront 1 brought to the table in really expanding on, many of the concepts that were featured within it. But then just when plans were shaping up for Battlefront 3, things changed behind the scenes and the project ended up completely scrapped. Likewise with the new saga, EA and DICE rebooted this beloved franchise, made an awesome first game to establish this new era of Battlefront, and then Battlefront 2 in 2017 would be an expansion on those core ideals. Just as Battlefront 3 was nearing its conception and production, the project would ultimately be canned for unfortunate reasons. Battlefront 2 support would also be canceled, and so much potential would just be completely wasted. For as wonderful and amazing Star Wars Battlefront 2 is right now, it should have been much more, and there were plenty of updates that I feel would have really pleased the fans that just unfortunately never made it to the game. There are a bunch of iconic heroes that are just straight up missing. There are, actual animations in the game that were meant for some of these heroes. Like, for example, an ex-DICE dev that worked on Battlefront went on Reddit and confirmed that the animations for the ISB agent, the fact that it dual wields weapons, this dual wielding animations was actually originally designed for Ahsoka Tano and Asajj Ventress, which would have, ideally been counterpart heroes to each respective side, but we never got them. The last drop of heroes that Battlefront 2 did get as part of the sequel trilogy saga was BB-8 and BB-9E, which I guess is funny or whatever. It is kind of entertaining. Watch BB-8 absolutely body Darth Vader, one of the most powerful people in the Star Wars universe, but I don't think it's nearly satisfactory enough to warrant the final drop of heroes in such a legendary game, especially given that it wasn't really supposed to be the last ones, Ahsoka and Ventress being just a few of them. And it's even more depressing when you realize that these two heroes were probably being worked on heavily, or maybe even fully modeled, and were high on the priority list to add to the game eventually, whereas other heroes like Qui-Gon Jinn were still up there, but not quite as high on the priority list, but could have still been a possibility. Now, Star Wars Battlefront 2 made some pretty big changes from the original game. As legendary as that one was, I do feel one of the choices that was deliberately made that held the game back was the fact that they wanted the entire timeline to remain canon. So what that means is that heroes of different timelines couldn't play against each other. They wanted all of the content to take place around the same era so that nothing would contradict itself in canon, in theory. But I think that really held it back from being an awesome and just straight up fun video game. And that also meant the first Battlefront had less than stellar heroes added as the seasons went on. Like, I don't know, Nia Nub is cool, I guess, but like, bro, he's not like Obi-Wan or something, or Anakin. So DICE looked at this choice for Battlefront 2 and said, you know what? That we're just gonna have anybody play against anyone, and we're gonna add whatever heroes we feel like, and that's fine. And that is the better choice for a video game. And this really opened up the door to allow DICE's creativity to add essentially whoever they want from the Star Wars universe, making it a far more interesting and dynamic game. But they still do show some restraint for people who, don't want it to be so non-canon where it becomes silly or nonsensical. In modes like Galactic Assault, where you can actually pick which hero you play, they still only give you a small subset that is contextual to that map you're playing. So if you're playing on like Camino, and if you're playing as a Separatist, you're going to get stuff like Grievous, because it would make sense for him to be there. You won't have somebody like Iden Versio on that. I will say, for the most part, all things considered, they do a good job at keeping the eras relatively separate in their respective modes. Again, outside of stuff like heroes versus villains, they still try to keep it mostly canon. Now, launch Battlefront 2 is very different to current day Star Wars Battlefront 2 in many ways, but one of them is the balance of content throughout the sagas. And at the beginning of the game, it was far more one-sided than it is now, but I would say that, if I'm being fair, it's got a fair balance of Clone Wars stuff, original trilogy, and the sequel trilogy stuff. But that's not to say that we got everything we wanted, or even the developers wanted, and that's not to say that we didn't reach its full potential. Specifically, I'm thinking about with the Clone Wars era stuff, because a lot of the DICE developers working on this game were self-reported huge fans of the Clone Wars series, and really wanted to develop content in that wheelhouse. And there were tons of heroes and even planets that they wanted to add, but for one reason or another just couldn't do. Stuff like Coruscant and Mustafar were in the plans to be added. Now, we'll touch back on this stuff later, things that never made it into the game, but let's spend some time talking about gameplay, the evolution of Battlefront 2, and where it went, and the things that are available to play right now. The thing is, Battlefront 2 did evolve a lot since its launch, and dare I even bring up the absolutely abhorrent and disgusting loot box system that was by far Battlefront 2's biggest controversy and the reason it found itself in hot water. I mean, still to this day, the loot box stigma is still attached to Battlefront 2 in some ways, even though it's been like 6 years since EA and DICE accepted the feedback and completely reworked the game. Now the stupid crate system isn't even really a factor. You unlock things through playing the game a lot more reasonably, and it's actually a very good system. That the loot crates have not even been a factor for, you know, legitimately over 6 years now. With that being said, the loot crates were still a blight on this game that we must not forget, as we don't want to repeat this mistake of the past. It was not okay, but it's been fixed and it's no longer an issue. While you don't have this absurd casino tier trash system where you unlock upgrades for everything in the game, troopers, heroes, starships alike, you do have an extremely grindy system to unlock star cards. And that's not necessarily a bad thing exactly. It just means that, number one, those with those star cards will by far have a pretty big advantage over new players who don't have these things unlocked yet. And also, it's going to take you a pretty insane amount of time to unlock the 4-star cards for every single thing in the game: heroes, troopers, starships, etc. And my problem is, personally, and I know a lot of you guys will also relate to this, I tend to pick favorites. I have preferences for troops, for ships, and certainly for heroes. I have very specific ones that I like to use, and that means without like a general XP system that will also apply to those ones, you have to individually use those heroes that you don't necessarily enjoy or you find tedious to use to even rank them up to begin with. So if there's a hero that I don't really like, there's no reason for me to play them, because to unlock the star cards that would maybe make them viable or fun, I have to grind for a really long time not having fun with them, when I could just play heroes that I have fun with that are already upgraded. And this just means that as the meta evolved, particularly in hero game modes, I have my small selections of ones that I enjoy playing. I have maybe 3 or 4 that I, circle around and don't really deviate from. Maybe on occasion I'll play somebody else, but not very often. And that's fine, it works for me. I still get some hero variety in my lobbies as other people may be playing somebody else and so on, but it's not really the same. But the other issue that I see with the other non-hero game modes, specifically stuff like Galactic Assault or Supremacy, is, and I really noticed this upon replaying it, it wasn't so pronounced maybe a few years ago when the meta wasn't as tightly knit as it is now, and especially considering that the only people regularly playing Battlefront 2 are pretty hardcore fans. Even though there are some newcomers that jump on the game here and there, by and large, it's people who've been playing for years that are still on. And the meta is clear as day. If you want to play as any other troop in the game, everybody just starts out as an officer and farms battle points, because one of the biggest fundamental changes that Battlefront 2017 made compared to the original 2015 DICE Battlefront was the way that you play and acquire heroes in the match. In the old Battlefront, you had to find and pick up these random hero drops. Now, they had fixed locations and spawns so that experienced players would know where they spawned and could kind of manipulate them and always take them over. I didn't really like this system a whole lot, and in Battlefront 2, they went on to rectify this with a system that I still really really like, which is now it's a performance-based system where the more you do in-game, you play the objective, you get kills, you help your team, whatever it is, you will earn these things called battle points, and then battle points can be spent to either acquire specialty troops or even save up for a hero. Now, there are limits to this. There's only a specific number of heroes that can be in play at any time, and this does have its downside, but I don't know if that necessarily outweighs the benefit because I love this performance-based system. Let me just be clear, I think it's absolutely fantastic. And even though I generally prefer this system and like it a lot better, that doesn't mean it's perfect. One of its glaring issues is, again, the fact that everybody just now will spawn as an officer at the beginning of the game. You spawn your battle command, and then there's even a star card that grants you battle points at an increased rate. So everybody's racing to get these special troops and or heroes, and also because there can only be a certain amount in play, oftentimes what will happen is people in your lobby will just sit on the hero menu and wait for one to become available, not participating in the match at all, but just waiting for somebody, whoever's playing them, to die so that they can be them. I've had matches where I'm like, where did all my teammates go? And it seems like they're all just sitting in the menu waiting for Kylo Ren to be playable. In retrospect, this is a pretty big flaw in the system, even though generally speaking, I like this better. Now, I thought of a solution for this, and for Star Wars Battlefront 3, a Star Wars Battlefront game that's definitely going to come out that is certainly a sequel to Battlefront 2 that's totally not canceled or anything, but I was thinking for another way to improve this. Imagine you have enough battle points to play as a hero, but the max number are in play. You can just click on that hero and you'll be added to a queue, and then you can keep playing the game, and then when it's your turn, you'll get an option to just immediately play as that hero or pass it on and decline it. I think that would fix the issue of people sitting in the menus waiting to be the first one to click on it, and it would keep people playing, and I feel it would just generally be an improvement to this system, but who cares anymore? It's not like Battlefront 3 is going to get made and they're going to implement this system. A man can dream. Anyways, that's just one example of a pretty fundamental change DICE made to the core gameplay loop of Battlefront 2 to separate it and improve from the original game. While we're still on the topic of heroes, it's worth mentioning how different the heroes function and behave compared to their versions in the original Star Wars Battlefront. And mechanically, they're different. Their abilities are much more thought out and unique compared to the first game, whereas, in Battlefront 2015, Vader and Luke were basically the same hero, minus like one or two force abilities. They played almost identically, and Vader and Luke in Battlefront 2 are very different, and same goes for the rest of the cast. Another massive change in heroes versus villains: in the original Battlefront, you start as a hero, and when you die once, you play as a troop for the rest of the game. Each hero only has one life. In Battlefront 2, there's a total of 30 lives amongst the team, and you play as a hero the entire time, and it plays much more akin to the original Battlefront 2's, hero mode, if that makes sense. You get a lot more playtime with each character, and I personally just think it's much more fun this way. And not to mention, besides a couple of moments in the game's life cycle where the meta was completely broken, there would be a hero that is by far way too powerful for the rest of the cast, and they would be rebalanced. Where Battlefront is right now in the year 2024, I would say that the hero balancing is pretty good, all things considered. It's actually like a miracle that they were able to balance a game with this many characters, this many abilities, and variables as well as they did. It's actually shocking. While it's by no means perfect, there were eras in time that were far more unbalanced than it is now, and it's very playable still. Now, I would say that currently, mostly everybody you're going to find in these lobbies have been playing for a long time, and it's super sweaty now, but I still think that these can be incredibly fun, competitive matches, and even though the villain side, I think, in general has a bit of an edge over the light side heroes, it still doesn't mean that, one side is going to always win. In terms of additional content outside of this stuff, it's worth talking about how Battlefront 2 finally had a proper single-player campaign, and that was, again, one of the things that 2015 got into a little bit of trouble about, is people were upset there was no really single-player content at all to speak of, not even really a genuine instant action playlist, and Battlefront 2 actually rectified both of these issues. You have a single-player campaign where you primarily play as Iden Versio, and these events take place shortly after Return of the Jedi. This campaign's pretty cool. It's not anything groundbreaking or incredibly memorable, but it is nice single-player content to have on this disc. And then also, there was finally a proper instant action playlist that was pretty much completely made from community feedback. People made such a big deal about having instant action back from the classic Battlefronts, as it was such an integral feature to experiencing all of the content it had to offer, and it does make a return in the new Battlefront 2, which is awesome because it wasn't in the 2015 one either. But I will say it's a little buggy still, like it's not quite as polished as it could be, and instant action received essentially no updates as the life cycle of Battlefront 2 went on, and unfortunately it's probably just one of those things that didn't have enough resources and ended up getting neglected. While it's fine and it's playable, it's definitely not as expansive as it probably could be to keep on par with the rest of the features in the game. And even more heartbreaking and just downright depressing is there's no Galactic Conquest in Battlefront 2, which I would have done anything for that to be a mode in here. And frankly, I think it would have played fantastic in these new systems. This would have been probably one of the most fun game modes to play, would have been certainly better than instant action and campaign as far as like just single player stuff goes, if they implemented it how it was in the classic Battlefronts, but they probably could have expanded it and maybe even added some multiplayer element to it as well. I just feel it's a massive missed opportunity to not utilize in what is, in my opinion, the defining game mode of Star Wars Battlefront in a Battlefront game. Just a big missed opportunity in my opinion, and I know there's a lot of modders that have made modes similar to it, but it's just not really the same. DICE really had something quite special with Battlefront 2, and if I must say, I think this is one of those very rare instances in which a live service game was done right and it was made better as a result. While live service certainly has so many downsides, you know, I don't need to tell you guys that, it does have a few positives, and the nature of it being live service was one of the primary reasons we were able to get rid of the loot box system and have something much more consumer and player friendly implemented in the game. And not only that, while the selection of heroes on launch back in 2017 wasn't like insane or super stellar, where we're at in 2024 now, we have a lot of different heroes and characters and troopers to play alike. It's the most expansive Star Wars game where it has this many different planets and experiences to have across the board. You'll never get bored playing Battlefront 2 because there's just so much to do. And this is all if you're just playing the base vanilla game, not to mention the insanely large modding community that has formed around Battlefront 2 that is single-handedly keeping the game alive. There is an unreal amount of mods that you can play for yourself using a lot of what's in Battlefront 2, but playing these experiences that unfortunately never made it to the real legitimate build of the game. Planets like Mustafar and Coruscant, even, you know, versions of different heroes that we never saw like Mace Windu, Ventress, Ahsoka, you name it. While PC doesn't have the biggest overall player base, I believe console still has much more people active at any given time. There is much more to do on Battlefront 2 PC if you really want to delve into that. It becomes a completely different experience, and I think that's great. The modders are single-handedly keeping that aspect of the community alive and bringing in things that we wanted to see for the real build of the game that just unfortunately never came to fruition. Now, you might find yourselves asking a very reasonable question. What the hell happened to Battlefront 2? If it was so wildly successful, it was probably the biggest Battlefront game to ever release by far. What happened? Why did, number one, it get canceled and there's no more content being developed on it and everything was scrapped? And number two, why is there not going to be a Battlefront 3? While we can't definitively say there will never be a Battlefront 3, I do feel it's highly unlikely given the current circumstances, and there will certainly never be a Battlefront 3 made by the same people that made this amazing title. We can say for sure that Battlefront 2 did get canceled, and we know why, which is very unfortunate because EA basically had DICE pull a lot of their devs off to go work on Battlefield 2042. Yes, that's correct, and clearly Battlefield 2042 was a fantastic game. It worked exceptionally well. It was incredibly polished at launch. There was not a single bug wrong with it. In fact, it was the first game to ever release in the world that had no bugs. It was perfect. It was brilliant. So well done, EA. Well done, DICE. Thank you guys. Obviously, that was not the situation. The disastrous launch of 2042 ate up a lot of resources, and just like that, all of the future plans for new content of Battlefront 2, new seasons in fact, or what would have been the equivalent to seasons, because they didn't really do that model here. They did like community updates, but all of the plans for maps and heroes and troopers and weapons and so on, well, there wasn't actually that many plans for new weapons, to be honest. It was mostly just like maps and other characters, but regardless, there was still a lot of plans for Battlefront 2, and again, the fact that BB9E and BB8 were the last heroes to ever be added to Battlefront 2 before it got canceled, that just is clear as day that really wasn't supposed to be how it ended. This game did get cut off at the knees, which is just so sad. And recently, I made a video revisiting Battlefield 2042 and seeing where it is now compared to its launch, and it is very different. The game's in a much better state than it was, which is similar to how Battlefront 2's life cycle went, ironically enough. But the fact that Battlefield 2042 got their shit together in some sense is not really the point. It's just the fact that there was so much more cool stuff that Battlefront 2 was supposed to get that just got thrown in the trash because it all had to be sacrificed for development on Battlefield 2042. And even so, a lot of the DICE developers who were working on Star Wars specifically wanted to work on Battlefront, and they didn't want to work on Battlefield. So many of them left, and never to work on these kinds of games again. And that's why I say, even though there's no current plans for them to make a Battlefront 3, it wouldn't even be the same, because so many of the creative directors, the leads, and the lead programmers would not be present if they did make a Battlefront 3. Even if it was by DICE, it would be by vastly different people, so it wouldn't really be the same at all. And you want to know something that's really going to blow your mind? And I'm only half joking when I say this. There might be a better possibility that before we get a Battlefront 3, we might get a Star Wars Battlefront reboot again. Like, think about this. The original, the classics, came out in like the early 2000s, about 2005, 2007. Those were the era for those older ones. And then Battlefront got rebooted again, and with the 2015 game by EA and DICE. And, about 10 years later, give or take. And then now we are in the year 2024, and in less than one short year, the DICE Battlefront in 2015 will become 10 years old. That's approximately the same time at which it took for them to reboot the series again. So, I'm kind of being silly, but I would imagine that with as much time has passed, instead of doing a Battlefront 3 and, trying to have DICE do this again with the same developers, just because that's not possible, what if they rebooted Battlefront again and we started from the beginning, and maybe, just maybe, we could get a full trilogy? Perhaps this is me on some severe lethal copium. I might be ODing right now, but listen, man, I just want great Star Wars games, and there will confidently never be another game quite like this Star Wars Battlefront 2. It's absolutely fantastic. I've been playing it so much recently, and I remember why I absolutely fell in love with it. It's the reason I made another YouTube channel on top of the one that you're currently watching. It inspired me so much that I, created a whole other channel specifically to play this game, and it was great. And I would love if there was an actual Battlefront 3 to follow up on, but I just don't see that being the case, and especially not from the same developers that made this one. That will never happen. I think Battlefront 2 innovated in the same way that the classic one did in the modern age. At the end of the day, it gave us an unbelievably expansive roster of people in the Star Wars universe to play as, a wide variety of planets and experiences to have, and is just an overall a fantastically balanced and well-designed game at that. While personally, I would have loved to see it reach its full potential with whatever else they had planned for the roster and planets that we could have seen. And if all went well, maybe even a Battlefront 3 that took this base game and then further expanded upon that in the future, maybe even on a better console or better hardware. That was one of the other issues that prevented DICE from adding some of the things, is hardware just wasn't really quite up to par. And, obviously, tech is a lot better now. They could have done some great things, but I just don't think it's ever going to happen in the way that we're expecting. Not to say that there will never be another Battlefront 3 game, or hell, again, even a reboot, but there will safely never be anything quite like Star Wars Battlefront 2 2017. I think DICE made an absolutely fantastic experience, and this is some of their best work to date.